Hello, my name is John Robinson and I am part of SAP's Global Manufacturing and Industry 4 team. In this presentation, I will provide an analysis of where global manufacturing is today and explain why I think we need a major change to the status quo. But in addition to putting forward the case for change, I will also be proposing a solution. And it's a solution that, if it is adopted, would represent a paradigm shift for both the manufacturing industry and the supplier ecosystem. Today, manufacturing CXOs globally are considering what strategies to adopt in the future. There has been endless talk about the new normal, and there are certainly no shortage of ideas from the supplier ecosystem as they too try to respond and adapt to the current crisis. Now, whilst it is true that many of the strategies being proposed do represent a significant change to current operating models, what I would argue is that all of the ideas being proposed are only an evolution to the way that we work, and what I believe we need is a revolution. But before you can put any weight on my opinion, you need to know a little bit about me. What are my credentials to even have an opinion in the first place? Well, I spent the first 10 years of my career in manufacturing, but I'm not from an IT or an engineering background. I'm actually a marketing executive. The manufacturer I worked for in the late 1990s supplied GE when Jack Welch was CEO, so everything we did as a supplier was driven by Six Sigma. In my role, I got involved in understanding manufacturing processes, quality, statistical process control, sales forecasting, demand planning, production planning, logistics, and global supply chains. I was also involved in an ERP implementation, so overall it was a great education in manufacturing. The work I did there got me interested in technology, so I moved into manufacturing IT, but initially at the shop floor level with automation system integrators. I was involved with most of the operational technologies such as PLCs, SCADA, MES, and LIMS from the major vendors including Siemens, Rockwell, Emerson, Eurotherm, Honeywell, and several others. A lot of the work we did was in the life science industry, and I was involved with the FDA and ISPE, so I'm very familiar with validation, 21 CFR 11, and the needs of the regulated industries. After the systems integration experience, I went to work for a manufacturing technology vendor, Wonderware, which is now part of Schneider Electric. I was head of MES business development in EMEA, and that is when I first began working with SAP in around 2006 on a concept called the Perfect Plant, which in many ways was a precursor to Industry 4. Following my time at Wonderware, I spent 6 years at Atos, who are a global IT services provider. And after spells in Atos system integration and Atos consulting, I progressed to become global MES portfolio lead and eventually part of the Industry 4 team. Atos were part owned by Siemens at the time, so I was also involved with the Siemens Digital Factory and Siemens MindSphere teams. After Atos, I moved to one of the big four, where I spent 2 years in EY advisory as part of EY's global smart factory team. And as some of you may know, EY have a global partnership with Procter & Gamble to implement P&G's Operational Excellence Methodology, IWS, into other manufacturers. Some of the P&G sites are on the World Economic Forum's Industry 4 Global Lighthouse Network, and during my time there, I was lucky enough to visit some of them. And finally, in June of last year, I joined SAP, who are a market-leading IT technology vendor. In my current role, I'm involved with all of our solution delivery partners, as well as our technology partners such as Microsoft and more recently, Siemens. This career has enabled me to work with a wide range of manufacturers, and the logos here are just some of them. I've seen every type of manufacturing process across all industries, from submarines to fast-moving consumer goods. And in addition to that, I've also been fortunate enough to travel globally in my career and often engaged at CXO level. The point I'm trying to convey here is that I have an unusual and diverse career path that has given me a very rounded and holistic view of global manufacturing. I've seen it from the manufacturer's point of view and almost all parts of the supplier ecosystem. So what has all that experience taught me? Well, it has taught me that the status quo is broken and is not fit for purpose. There are major systemic problems with the way that we interact with each other, and without change, I think we are in serious trouble. In my opinion, there are 3 major negative impacts of the status quo. First of all, it did not enable us to maximize the potential of the third industrial revolution. It is not enabling the progress of the fourth industrial revolution, and it will not enable us to respond quickly enough to the serious situation we are now in. And to me, that last point is the most important one. We are currently in a perfect storm where we are facing threats at every level. As individuals, as a society, as corporate entities, at a global economic level, and at a global environmental level. There has never been a more urgent need for change than there is right now. But who and what exactly is the status quo, and how did it come to exist? Well, let's begin with the basic premise that the universal objective of all manufacturers is, and always has been, performance improvement. To perform better tomorrow than they did today. Now, performance is measured in many different ways, and those measures also change over time as priorities change. But typical examples are shareholder value, profit, market share, customer satisfaction, growth, and sustainability. So what have manufacturers done historically to improve their performance? Well, what I have seen during my career is that all of the global manufacturers I have worked with have followed four major trends that have been aimed at improving their manufacturing performance. The first one is strategy. In its simplest form, a manufacturer's strategy is essentially what to make, how to make it, and where to make it. And strategy is influenced by a huge range of internal and external factors. In pre-2020, the typical examples I used to illustrate strategic influences were things such as sustainability, the circular economy, Brexit, changing consumer behaviour, disruptive business models, and trade wars. These strategic factors drive mergers, acquisitions, and divestments. They also drive new market entry, new product development, and capital investment in manufacturing facilities. A look at any global manufacturer's history will provide an example of this strategic trend. The second major trend has been the introduction of operational excellence programs. Most major manufacturers have their own internally branded lean methodology, but the core principles can be traced back to the fundamentals of Taylor, Ford, Shingo, Toyota Production System, Six Sigma, and Theory of Constraints. And again, examples of these tools and techniques can usually be seen in action during a walk around most production facilities. The third major trend aimed at improving manufacturing performance has been the investments made in information technology. And in this definition, I'm referring to the solutions that typically fall into the domain of the CIO and the IT department, such as ERP and supply chain solutions. And the fourth major trend has been the investments made in operational technology. And operational technologies are the solutions that perform the make activities inside the four walls of the factory. And this is normally the domain of the engineering department. Now, whilst most organizations can see clear improvements in manufacturing performance as a result of each of these four investment areas, the overwhelming feedback from CXOs is that none of the four investment areas have fully delivered on their potential. The manufacturers didn't quite achieve the level of manufacturing performance improvement they expected, and their current KPIs still show that there is room for improvement. So why is this the case? Well, first of all, let's look at the internal dynamics inside a typical manufacturer. The strategic manufacturing goals and objectives are cascaded down from CXO level to manufacturing operations. The Operational Excellence Program provides the principles, tools, and methodologies for manufacturing to utilize in the pursuit of performance improvement. But to deliver that improvement, the business needs data, information, and supporting processes. And the business usually looks internally in two main directions for solutions. One source of solutions is the CIO and IT. And whilst IT support many of the business processes, they do not build production facilities. That is the domain of the second source of solutions, which is engineering. Process engineers, chemical, mechanical, electrical, and automation engineers, to name just a few. And again, what I have seen in my experience is that IT and engineering do not collaborate particularly well. In many cases, they actually appear to be in competition, as they champion different solutions to solve essentially the same business problem. The net result is that these internal frictions and challenges often leave manufacturing operations without the solutions they need to hit their goals, and overall results tend to plateau below expectations. Now let's look at the dynamics in the external ecosystem of suppliers. The dominant players advising on strategy in the C-suite are the pure consulting firms such as McKinsey, BCG, Bain, Kearney, Bearing Point. And in addition, there are the advisory arms of the Big Four and the consulting arms of the large system integration companies. In the traditional IT ecosystem, you will find the major enterprise software application vendors, their integration partners, and a wide range of hardware and platform providers. But in the OT ecosystem, we find a very different set of hardware and software vendors. The implementation partners differ, and OT is also where we find the OEMs such as Tetra Pak, Krones, and many others. And finally, the operational excellence ecosystem is largely populated by consultancies who provide professional services that specialize in teaching and implementing operational excellence techniques and programs. So in many respects, the external ecosystem of suppliers is a mirror image of the challenges found inside a manufacturing company. Each of the four domains has a lot of value to offer, but none of them can deliver it in isolation. They are also often in competition, promoting their solution as the one that will deliver the next step change in performance. The trouble is that overall performance is not down to an individual part of the system. Performance comes when the individual parts of the system work together. And an audit of a typical manufacturer shows just how many stakeholders have an impact on performance. So if we take a topic like sustainability as an example, then everyone on this diagram has an impact on sustainability, but no one supplier can deliver it. And the challenge is that manufacturing systems such as this are complex, and historically we did not find a way to deal with that complexity. One of the reasons we never dealt with the complexity is due to the nature of the relationships between manufacturers and suppliers, and between the suppliers themselves. And again, what I have observed is the following. The CXOs engage consultancies to help them define the strategy, and the deliverable is a strategy document. That strategy is shared internally, and each department develops their own departmental strategy. Those departmental strategies are broken down into their component parts, and the manufacturer looks for solutions in the marketplace. The suppliers propose what they think is required, or let's be honest, what they want to sell. And in general, the communication and information flow from the manufacturer to the supplier is linear and peer-to-peer. It is often quite adversarial and typically buyer-supplier in nature. There is also very little communication between the suppliers. And even when two suppliers are partners, the reality is that they are very reluctant to share information and protective of what they think they know. The net result of this way of working is that these big historical transformation projects take longer than the manufacturer expected, cost more than the manufacturer expected, and they deliver less value than the manufacturer expected. And all of the issues I've described so far, the internal dynamics, the external dynamics, the system complexity, the engagement model we all follow, and the nature of communication between us, all of this is the status quo. And in my opinion, this is why manufacturers did not maximize their historic investments. But the point to emphasize here, however, is that what we are still discussing here on screen is Industry 3. In recent years, the picture has become more complicated by the advent of Industry 4. The past decade has seen the emergence of a wide range of disruptive technologies such as augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT platforms, 3D printing, and several others. And when grouped together and applied in a manufacturing context, we have the basis of Industry 4. And the Industry 4 white space is being entered by most of the established consultancies, as well as the traditional IT and OT ecosystem players. This area has also seen the emergence of the hyperscalers, together with a large number of startups. The excitement and potential of Industry 4 is something that both manufacturers and the supplier ecosystem have invested in very heavily. But where exactly is Industry 4 today? Well, a few years ago, in 2016, we were told that we stood on the brink of a technological revolution. In 2017, there was a McKinsey report that said Industry 4 would deliver $3.7 trillion of value by 2025, and that was just in the discrete industries. Yet just 1 year later, in 2018, another McKinsey report recognized that most manufacturers were still stuck in pilot purgatory. And just 8 weeks ago in September 2020, the latest McKinsey report said that most manufacturers were still stuck in pilot purgatory. So again, the question is, why? Well, my answer is that nothing has fundamentally changed. The pre-Industry 4 status quo is still largely intact. The players are still grouped into their traditional domains and following their established business models, where consultancies sell to the CXOs, IT suppliers sell to the CIO, and OT vendors sell to engineers. We have never learned to deal with the complexity of Industry 3, and all Industry 4 has done is made the situation more complex. There are more technologies, more vendors, and more ways to improve performance. Industry 4 is also blurring the lines between the traditional silos, but in many ways that is making it even more difficult for manufacturers to know who to listen to and what to do next. Industry 4 means that we are moving even further away from neat silos and traditional layers into highly interconnected, interdependent, and dynamic systems, i.e. more complex systems. So everything I've described so far brings us to today. This is my analysis of the status quo and the systemic problems I see with it. My conclusion is that this way of working has failed us in the past and is not fit for purpose for the future. And given what I said earlier in terms of the urgent need for change, the question now is, what is the solution? How do we unlock manufacturing's value? If there is no single supplier who has a magic key, then what is the right combination? And I have used the words combination and lock deliberately, because that is a great way to visualize the solution I am proposing, which I have called the quorum principle. The quorum principle is a very simple idea. The starting point is for a manufacturer to answer this question. Which 5 suppliers have the biggest impact on you achieving your goals? If we look back at the typical stakeholder list I shared earlier, and as an example, let's assume it is their management consultants, their enterprise application software, their global system integrator, their global automation standard, and their hyperscaler. And in the case of manufacturer A, those suppliers may be McKinsey, SAP, Accenture, Siemens, and Microsoft Azure. Now, I think those 5 combined do have the potential to unlock a manufacturer's value. However, I think this will only work if the manufacturer brings all 5 together into the boardroom and mandates that moving forward, these 5, together with the manufacturer, will be collectively responsible for defining and delivering the manufacturer's strategic goals. This strategic quorum will be expected to work together in an open, cooperative, and collaborative manner to achieve a mutually beneficial outcome. And in its simplest form, that is the quorum principle. One important point to note, however, is that each manufacturer's combination will be specific to them. So in manufacturer B, it would be a different combination of suppliers. In manufacturer C, different again, and manufacturer D, different again. There are a few additional points I want to make about the quorum principle to give you some additional food for thought. Aristotle. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. In the examples shown, each supplier has a tremendous amount of value to bring in their specific domain. But however valuable that individual contribution is, I would argue that the value of the group's combined expertise is far greater than the sum of the parts. Another point I really want to stress is that there is no dream team combination of suppliers that will fit the needs of every manufacturer. What I am advocating is a process and an approach, not a specific group of vendors. The right combination of players needed to form the quorum will always be manufacturer specific and will be dependent on the manufacturer's own situation and their own needs. Tiering. All manufacturers will also have far more than 5 strategic suppliers. My proposal is that the suppliers are grouped into tiers. The Tier 1 group work with the client to drive the strategy, but the governance model would enable other suppliers to be brought in to contribute in exactly the same spirit of collaboration and cooperation. Coopetition. The majority of people will also understand that in almost any scenario, there will be areas of competitive overlap between the suppliers. The manufacturer has to be very clear in defining the scope and area of responsibility for each supplier. If an area is not defined and 2 or more suppliers could provide a solution, then that area is ring-fenced and a competitive process is followed in parallel to the normal business of the quorum. The client's decision is respected, and that area also then becomes a defined area. Mandate. This is by far the most important point. For this strategy to work, I believe it has to be mandated by the manufacturer with full executive sponsorship, and there are 2 reasons for this. Firstly, I don't think it is possible for this to be driven from the supplier ecosystem. There is no individual supplier that has the ability to sell this idea to all the other suppliers and form such a complicated coalition. There are too many issues related to competition, trust, and commercial aspects. Forming a 2-way partnership in the supplier ecosystem is challenging enough. A 6-way partnership would be exponentially more difficult. That does not mean, however, that people like me and others in the ecosystem are not trying or willing to drive this because they are. I'm simply trying to be realistic. And secondly, I also think it would be very difficult to make this work from a departmental level inside a manufacturer. Manufacturers also face internal challenges related to jurisdiction, budgets, and ownership that would also make it almost impossible to achieve if driven by an individual functional area. Only the manufacturer's executive leadership can provide the mandate to make this happen. So there you have it, the quorum principle. Now, I believe that working in this way would represent a major change to the status quo. This would be a revolution. However, there is also no doubt that working in this way would be difficult. So why do it? What value does it offer? First of all, we have left an enormous amount of money on the table from the investments of the past 30 years. There are significant gains to be made by simply revisiting manufacturing with a new collaborative approach. That value is hidden in plain sight, and it can be accessed quickly because it doesn't require major new investment. But in addition to the old money we can recover, I believe that Industry 4 can deliver on its promise. The $3.7 trillion of value may be real, but we won't access it if we don't change our approach. And the third reason is the environmental, social, and governance criteria manufacturers are under from socially conscious investors. But beyond the direct commercial benefits, there are other, arguably more important benefits. First of all, I think the quorum principle would enable manufacturing to recover more quickly. That will mean more companies will survive. More companies surviving means that more people stay employed, and both of those things will help the global economy. And if the economy is stable, then we will function better as a society. But most importantly of all, if we can achieve this, then manufacturing will be more efficient and more effective. We will consume less to produce the same, consuming less energy and raw materials, whilst at the same time producing less emissions and less waste. We will become more sustainable and get closer to a circular economy, which will be a big step towards helping the environment we live in.